Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Regibog cast. Today is going to be a very educative lesson, not only for you guys, but also for Bogo, because he has not done history, but I have for my GCSEs. But that does not end it right here. Editor, can we please have a picture of Mr. Light right behind me, please?
Who?
Thank you. Mr. Light.
What the
You
fuck is that?
know Red. Poppy's Playtime.
Oh, okay.
Because she's the teacher, and I'm also the teacher today. And then don't worry, we will also talk about the most notorious killer during that time. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's. Okay. So I actually wrote an entire essay just for this. Okay, literally, I have it right in front of me. Okay. Now we're gonna talk about the Industrial Revolution for the UK, not what happened elsewhere, and we'll mainly focus on London. But I might mention like places that are outside of London, but that's all. But that's because of the information that I gathered. Okay,
How big is
so
this gonna be? Like an
yeah,
hour
cool.
or 30 minutes?
More than that. Come on, man.
Oh,
It's
for
nine.
God's sake, that's
It's almost 10,000 words.
okay. That's too much, mate. That's too much.
It's a podcast, mate. Come on.
Uh,
Have you ever watched the Fresh and Fit or whatever podcast? Those podcasts are like six
I
hours
really
long.
don't watch podcasts. It's
Yeah,
just
neither
like
do I.
talking. Just don't
Yes.
bother. All right, go on. Let's
Yeah.
start.
So what is the Industrial Revolution? So the Industrial Revolution, Bogo, it is a transition for the human economy where we went from physical manual labor to starting using machines that run on steam and coal engines, okay, which were mainly manufactured for factories. Okay, maybe if you go around Hackney, maybe if you go around Whitechapel, you might find old factories which have been turned into houses now. And during this period, textiles, you know what textiles are, right? You know what textiles
Yeah,
are?
it's like basic clothes and stuff.
Clothes, yes. It was the dominant industry in the UK in terms of employment, value of output, and capital invested. That is because they got their cotton imported from slaves. So that whole stereotype uh, about slaves picking up cotton, that's true. So since the Industrial Revolution began in the Great Britain, it was the leading commercial nation controlling a global trading empire with colonies in North America and the Caribbean. Britain had a majority military political hegemony on the Indian subcontinent, um, particularly with the proto-industrialized Mughal Bengal, which is the west of Bengal in India and Bangladesh. Okay, through the activities of the East India Company. Do you know what the East India Company is?
What's
So
that?
they were okay. So the East India Company was actually a company that went to India, and because they had weapons and everything, that's the company who controlled India when India was a colony.
Oh, okay.
All right. However, during the Industrial Revolution in the 1830s, sorry, not 1930s, 1830s, Great Britain fell into an economic recession until the early 40s. So it was a very short recession when the adoption of industrial revolution's early innovations such as mechanized spinning and weaving slowed as their market matured. Innovations developed late in the period like the increased adoption of locomotives, steamboats, and steamships. So locomotives are literally trains,
Mm.
like those old trains. And also another creation was the hot blast iron smelting. New
Okay.
technologies such as the electrical telegraph, widely introduced in the 1840s and 1850s, were not powerful enough to drive high rates of growth. Rapid economic growth began to occur after 1870, springing from a new group of innovations in what has been called the Second Industrial Revolution. These innovations included new steel-making processes, mass production, assembly lines, electrical grid systems, the large manufacture of machine tools, and the use of increasingly advanced machinery in steam-powered factories. So technically, what the British have done is literally what inspired to create Pal World. That's pretty much what it is. And now we're gonna talk about the technological development. So we know that textiles is one of them. Then it was steam power, iron making, and machine tools. So one of them was the milling machine. You know what the milling machine is?
Milling, is it to do with something with the wheat?
Yes, it is. Good. It is something to do with wheat. Yes, it's basically because before you had to grind it by hand. Now you had a machine that keeps spinning around that was run by coal or steam, mainly steam, and that would make the milling machine turn on its own. Machine tools made the economical manufacture of precision metal parts possible, although it took several decades to develop effective techniques for making interchangeable parts. Then, in 1824, a man by the name of Joseph Aspidin,
Joseph Stalin.
no Stalin. The fuck does Stalin was not even born in 1824, mate.
Oh shit.
I think it was born in the 1890s. Yeah. So Joseph Aspdin, a British bricklayer who then became a builder, patented a chemical process for making Portland cement, which was an important advance in the building trades. This involves sintering a mixture of clay and limestone to about 1,400 degrees C, then grinding it into a fine powder, which is then mixed with water, sand, and gravel to produce concrete. So this is the man behind concrete, Joseph Aspdin. Keep note of that. Maybe imagine they use this clip for GCSEs. Fuck it. I'll be proud of it. Though others made a similar innovation elsewhere. The large scale induction of gaslighting, not gaslighting as how the
Open.
not gaslighting as like how the politicians do it, but gaslighting as in like lighters. And it was done by the work of William Murdoch. Not Murdoch as in the family that owns all of Western media, but he's an employee of Bolton and Watt. The process consisted of the large scale gasification of coal in furnaces, the purification of gas, and its storage and contribution. The first gas lighting utilities were established in London between 1812 and 1820. They soon became one of the major consumers of coal in UK. Next one is the railways. All right, the railways was very interesting because it was a steam engine, and this was demonstrating on an iron plate covered wooden tramway in 1805 at Croydon, which we know now Croydon is a shithole. And the steam locomotives began being built after the introduction of high pressure steam engines after the expiration of the Bolton and Watt patent in 1800. High pressure engines exhausted used steam to the atmosphere, doing away with the condense and cooling water. They were also much lighter weight and smaller in size for a given horsepower, and the stationary condensing engine. A few of these early locomotives were used in mines. Steam-hauled public railways began with the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1825, which is not in London. All right, next one, we're going to talk about the social effects, okay? Then after, we're going to talk about... I forgot what the next chapter is, but fuck it. Anyway, the rapid population growth in... Now, this is the social effect, okay? The rapid population growth in the 19th century included the new industrial manufacturing cities, as well as service centres such as Edinburgh and London. The critical factor was financing, which was handheld by building societies that dealt directly with large contracting firms. Private renting from housing landlord was the dominant tenure. P. Kemp, we're going to call him P. Kemp. Let's call him Penis Kemp. So Penis Kemp says this was usually, I don't really know, but just for the comedy of it, was usually of advantage to tenants. People moved in so rapidly there was not enough capital to build adequate housing for everyone. So low-income incomers squeezed into increasingly overcrowded slums. One example of a slum is Whitechapel and St Giles, which is in West London. So then clean water, sanitation and public health facilities were inadequate, which means there were not enough. The death rate was high, especially infant mortality, and tuberculosis among young adults. Cholera from polluted water and typhoid were endemic. Unlike rural areas, there were no famines such as the one that devastated Ireland in the 1840s. Do you know which famine I'm talking about? That happened in Ireland? The Great Potato Famine. Well,
Fuck.
actually, not the Great Potato Famine. The Irish Potato Famine. Yes, that's what it is. Even to this day,
Oh, the famine. Yeah, yeah, I remember the famine.
yeah, where it killed like 70% of the population, and it still has not even recovered today in Ireland alone. That's because of the UK being absolute assholes, and so that's why. A large expose literature grew up condemning the unhealthy condition. Okay. The Industrial Revolution led to a population increase, but the chances of surviving childhood did not improve throughout the Industrial Revolution. Although infant mortality rates were reduced markedly, there was still limited opportunity for education, and children were expected to work. Employers could pay a child less than an adult, even though their productivity was comparable. So basically, like China. There was no need for strength to operate an industrial machine, and since the industrial system was new, there was no experienced adult laborers. This made child labor the labor of choice for manufacturing in the early phases of the Industrial Revolution between the 18th century and 19th century. In England and Scotland in 1788, two-thirds of the workers in 143 water-powered cotton mills were described as children. So which meant the UK had child slaves, just like how China does, but China is much different. They have laborers, but not like how they did here, but not like how it's written here. Okay. Many children were forced to work in relatively bad conditions for much lower pay than their elders. 10 to 20% of an adult male's wage. So whatever a male adult made in a factory, a child will only get 10%, 10 to let's say 15% of that.
It's peak.
I know it's fucking peak. Reports were written dealing some of the abuses, particularly in the coal mine sand textile factories, and this helped popularize the children's plight. The public outcry, especially among the upper middle classes,
What
helped
year was
stir
this?
change. This is all in the 1800s,
Okay,
Industrial Revolution time. Okay,
so
let's say
1800 would
1840.
be 17. Oh, no, 1800 should be 17, isn't it?
19th century. It's 19th century, mate. When the
Oh,
21st century, World War Two, World War One, and World War Two was 20th century. All right. So
okay.
housing conditions of working class people who migrated to the cities was often overcrowded and unsanitary, creating a favorable environment for the spread of diseases such as typhoid, cholera, and smallpox. Further, exacerbated by a lack of sick leave. All right. Now, the East End of London, which is where you live, actually, which is one of the parts where you live. All right. The East End of London, with an economy oriented around the Docklands and polluting industries clustered along the Thames and the River Lee, and had been an area of working poor. By the 19th century, it was developing an increasingly sinister reputation for crime, overcrowding, desperate poverty, and debauchery. The 1881 census counted over 1 million inhabitants in the East End, a third of whom lived in poverty. The Cheap Trains Act of 1883, while it enabled many working class Londoners to move away from the inner cities, and had the effect of accentuating the poverty in areas like the East End, your area, where the most destitute were left behind. Prostitution was rife, with one official report in 1888 which recorded that there were 62 brothels. You know what a brothel is?
Yeah, yeah.
What is it? What's a brothel then?
It's like a whole house.
Good, it's a whorehouse. And 1,200 hosts in Whitechapel. This is what you can call OnlyFans, but without the fonts. It's literally that. Without the internet, you can say.
Hmm.
Or you can just call it Victorian OnlyFans. Anyway, with the traffic congestion on London's roads becoming more and more serious, proposals for underground railways to ease the pressure on street traffic were first mooted in the 1840s after the opening of the Thames Tunnel in 1843 proved such engineering work could be done successfully. Yeah, that is because there was so many like horse carriages because that was the only mode of transport back then, So they decided, let's build a train. Let's build the London Underground. However, reservations over the stability of the underground tunneling persisted into the 1860s and were finally overcome when Parliament approved the construction of London's first underground railway, the Metropolitan Railway. So the Metropolitan line. That's the first train line in the country.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah, that's the first ever. Begun in 1860 and completed in 1863, the Metropolitan inaugurated the world's oldest mass transit system, the London Underground, and it was created by the cut and cover method of excavating a trench from above, then building reinforced brick walls and vaults to form the tunnel and filling in the trench with earth. The Metropolitan initially ran from Farringdon in the east to Paddington in the west. The open wooden passenger cars were propelled by a coke-fueled steam locomotive and lit with gas lamps to provide illumination in the tunnels. The line was such a success, carrying 9.5 million passengers in its first year of operation. An extension to the western suburb of Hammersmith was built and opened in 1868. In 1884, the Metropolitan was linked with the Metropolitan District Line at District Line at Aldgate to form an inner circle encompassing central London, the modern Circle Line, with a short stretch running from Aldgate to Whitechapel. In 1880, the extension line to northwest was opened from Baker Street Tube Station to the village of Harrow via Swiss Cottage and St John's Wood, expanding further over the coming decades and allowing prosperous suburbs to be developed around rural villages. Whew, a succession of private enterprises were formed to build new routes after the success of the Metropolitan line. After being the Metropolitan District Line opened in 1865, this line extended along the Thames from Westminster to South Kensington at first, but by 1889, it had been extended eastwards to Blackfriars and southwest all the way to Wimbledon. What's this one? Yes, the next line to be built and the first true tube dug with a tunneling shield designed by J.H. Greathead, rather than Dickhead, rather than cut and cover excavation, was the City and South London Railway. So I think that's a national rail service. Is it? Let me check.
Think so.
City and South London Railway. No, wait, is it? No, it's closed. I think it's it's is it still not working? No, it's not working anymore. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a national rail service actually back then. It was London's first underground line with electric locomotives and first to expand south of the river. Electrification allowed the tunnels to be dug deep below ground levels as ventilation for smoke and steam was no longer necessary. In the year 1894, an estimated 228,605,000 passengers were used the three underground railways then in operation compared to 11,720,000 in 1864 using the lone Metropolitan Railway. Before the century came to a close, a second deep level tube was opened in 1898, the Waterloo and City Line, the shortest of the London tube lines. Which I wonder, what's the point of the? Have you ever been to the Waterloo and City Line before?
No, I never. You?
I know, no, never. But it's so pointless. You're just there, like you can go there, and all you're gonna have is just a train going back and forth, just one way, literally just with just one stop, which are what do you call it? The destination, literally the destination. It was built to convey commuters between the City of London and Waterloo Station. Building of the Hampstead Hospital and residents in Fulham obtained an injunction preventing all cases of smallpox from bring tea to the inn hospitals. What's this? The first railway to be built in London was the London and Greenwich Railway, a short line from London Bridge to Greenwich, which opened in 1836. This was soon followed by the Great Rail Termini, which linked London to each corner of Britain. These include Euston, 1837, Paddington, 1838, Fenchurch Street, 1841, Waterloo, 1848, King's Cross, 1852. Boggo, what are you doing? Boggo,
What do you mean? What do you mean?
you muted.
Yeah, because I'm not saying nothing, so I'll mute myself. When I have to say I'm gonna unmute
Uh,
myself. So
okay, that's
no
fair.
background noise goes.
Okay. And St. Pancras, St. Pancras, 1868. By 1865, there were 12 political principal railway termini. The stations built along the lines in how the fuck do you say it? Ex-urban villages surrounding London. Boggle, you're muted. So how the hell was I supposed to know
Okay,
what the
I'll
hell
do
you just
myself.
said?
Exorbitant or ex.
Okay, here's the spelling: Exurban.
Oh,
Exurban.
ex urban. Is that even a word?
Exurban. Weirdly, it was.
Fuck hell.
Surrounding London allowed commuters' towns to be developed for the middle classes. The Cheap Trains Act helped poorer Londoners to relocate by guaranteeing cheap fares and removing a duty imposed on fares since 1844. The new working class suburbs created a result included West Ham, where your old place was, Walthamstow, Kilburn, and Willesden. Afterwards, there was some reforms. Okay, so the first reform, based on what I've said, the first one is called the Health and Moral of Apprentices Act of 1802. Tried to improve conditions for workers by making factory owners more responsible for the housing and clothing of the workers. But with little success, this act was never put into practice because magistrates failed to enforce it. That's because they are greedy cunts. The Cotton Mills and Factories Act of 1819 forbade the employment of children under the age of 9 in cotton mills and limited the house of work for children aged 9 to 16 to 12 hours a day. This was a major step towards a better life for children since they were less likely to fall asleep during work. Or if it was me during that time, I would have been asleep already, resulting in fewer injuries and beatings in the workplace. That was very common. That was very common. The Factories Act of 1844 limited women and young adults to working 12 hours a day, 12-hour days, and children from not ages 9 to 13 could only work 9-hour days. The act also made mill masters and owners more accountable for injuries to workers. The Factories Act 1847, also known as the 10-hour bill, made it law that women and young people worked not more than 10 hours a day and a maximum of 63 hours a week. The last two major factory acts of the Industrial Revolution were introduced in 1850 and 1856. After these acts, factories could no longer dictate working hours for women and children. They were to work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the summer and 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in the winter. These acts took a lot of power and authority away from the manufacturers and allowed women and children to have more personal time for their family and for themselves. I know, I know, they wanted the time where you could have slaves, but
Fuck hell.
I mean, that's literally what it was really. If like with America, America has done it, already for like decades. Okay, even the British. But honestly, they even tried to do it with their own people. I mean, it's still going on now. The Prevention of Cruelty to and Protection of Children Act of 1889 aimed to stop the abuse of children in both the work and family sphere of life. The Elementary Education Act of 1870 allowed all children within the UK to have access to education. Education was not made compulsory until 1880, since many factories owners feared the removal of children as a source of cheap labor. With the basic mathematics and English skills that children were acquiring, however, factory owners had a growing pool of workers who could read. Eventually, okay, now this is the government, okay? Based on the government, it's very short, okay? In 1829, Home Secretary Robert Peel established the Met Police as a police force covering the entire urban area, with the exception of City of London. Because if you don't know, the Met Police that we have here and the City of London Police are two different things actually. Which formed its own police force under a separate jurisdiction in 1839. In 1839, the two small forces which predated the Met, the Bow Street Runners and the Marine Police Force, were absorbed into it once and for all. So the Bow Street Runners was actually a private police force in Bow. You know that Bow, like Bow Road, Bow Church,
Yeah,
Bromley
yeah, Bo, Bo,
Bible,
Bo. E3, E3.
E3 area. Yes, the force gained the nicknames of Bobbies and Peelers, named after Robert Peel, and initially numbered 1,000 officers. Corruption was rife amongst this early batch of recruits, so much that the fifth 5/6 of the original force has been dismissed within 4 years. London's urban area grew rapidly, spreading into Islington, Paddington, Belgravia, Holborn, Finsbury, Shoreditch, Southwark, and Lambeth. With London's rapid growth towards the middle of the century, an urgent need to arose to reform London's system of local governments. Outside of the City of London, which resisted any attempts to expand its boundaries to encompass the wider urban areas, London had a chaotic local government system consisting of ancient parishes and vestries, working alongside an array of single purpose boards and authorities, few of which cooperated with each other. Drainage in the city was handled by seven different commissions of sewers, and then a 100 square yard of central London were four different bodies responsible for the pavement and upkeep of the streets. So here are these are the famous buildings and landmarks of London which were constructed during the 19th century. These are Buckingham Palace, Trafalgar Square, Nelson's Column, Big Ben and the House of Parliament, the Royal Albert Hall, Albert Memorial, Tower Bridge, Wellington Arch, Mabel Arch, British Museum, Natural History Museum, National Gallery, Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Colonial Office. Now, this is the best part. Editor, can we have the other Mr. Light, please? So, we're going to be talking about Jack the Ripper. Hello?
I'm listening. Jack the Ripper.
Good. Jack the Ripper, who was an unidentified serial killer, but now we know his name, and I will reveal it right at the end, okay? Now, he was an unidentified serial killer active in and around the impoverished Whitechapel district of London, England in 1888 in both criminal case files and the contemporaneous journalistic accounts. The killer was also called the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron, which never made any sense. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved women working as prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. Their throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations. The removal of internal organs from at least three victims led to speculation that their killer had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the murderers were connected intensified in September and October of 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from an individual purporting to be the killer. The name Jack the Ripper originated in the Dear Boss letter, written by an individual claiming to be the murderer, which was disseminated in the press. The letter is widely believed to have been a hoax and may have been written by journalists to heighten interest in the story, increase their newspaper's circulation. The From Hell letter, received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, came with half of a preserved human kidney. So basically, he just received in the mail half a kidney, purposely taken from one of the victims. The public came increasingly believe in the existence of a single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, mainly because of the extraordinary nature of the murderers and media coverage of the crimes. Oh yeah, and also Jack the Ripper claims to have eaten half of that kidney. He literally
Goddamn.
removed it, sliced it in half, and cooked it. Extensive newspaper coverage bestowed widespread and international notoriety on the Ripper, and the legend solidified. A police investigation into a series of 11 brutal murders committed in Whitechapel and Spitalfields between 1888 and 1891 was unable to connect all the killings conclusively to the murder of 1888. Five victims, Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are known as the Canonical Five. So that's canon. And the murderers between 31st of August and
Goddamn.
9th of November 1888 are often considered the most likely to be linked. The murders were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, folklore, and pseudo history capturing public imagination to the present day. In the mid 19th century, England experienced an influx of Irish migrants who swelled the population of the major cities, including the end of London. From 1882, Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in the Russian Empire and other areas of Eastern Europe emigrating to the same areas. So remember, Jews, remember who did the most damage to you. It was not the Palestinians, it was the Europeans.
Yo, I
Because
actually never wondered. You know why Hitler? You know Nazis? Why did they like hatred against the Jews?
it's because of like control, you know. It's mainly because of control and how they and how because Jews tend to have a lot of money, they can easily corrupt someone.
Okay, that's a bit weird. You know?
It's like with yeah, American Congress. American Congress, you might think it's independent, but in reality, about 80% or 90% of those in Congress are actually actually bought by Israeli lobbyist groups named APAC. Mainly APAC does it. It's because of that. It was only mainly because of controls, but the Jews that we're gonna but the Jews I'm gonna mention I say are the secular ones, not the Orthodox. I mean, think about it. Why is a secular Jewish rabbi owning Pornhub?
What?
I'm not joking. The rabbi is called Solomon Friedman, and I know, ladies and gentlemen, we're going off topic, but Solomon Friedman, who is a secular Jewish rabbi, owns Pornhub.
Fuck yeah.
Okay, so back to Jack the Ripper. The parish of Whitechapel in the East End became increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasing to approximately 80,000 inhabitants by 1888. The work and housing conditions worsened, and a significant economic underclass developed. 55% of children born in East End died before they were 5 years old. Robbery, violence, and alcohol dependency were commonplace, and the endemic poverty drove many women to prostitution to survive on a daily basis. In 1888, the Met Police Service estimated there were 62. Oh yeah, 62 brothels, 1,200 women working as hosts in Whitechapel, with approximately 8,500 people residing in 233 common lodging houses within Whitechapel every night, with the nightly price for a coffin bed being 4 pence, equivalent to £2 in 2021. Do you know what a coffin bed is, right?
No, what's up?
So you know a coffin, right? Like
Hmm?
caskets. Imagine that, but you pay £2 per night just to sleep in there.
Fucking hell.
And the cost of sleeping under a lean-to or hang-over rope stretch across the dormitory being being 2 pence per person. So which was £1, back then. Which was £1, which would be £1 in 2021. So let me explain to you what a lean-to or hangover rope is. All right. So imagine a bench. Okay. Imagine a bench, but in front of you there is a rope that you lean on to sleep. That is
Fuck
how.
yeah.
That is also how many factory workers slept back then. And then they dare call us and then they dare call us uncivilized when we had proper beds. Okay.
Mm.
All right. The economic problems in Whitechapel were accompanied by a steady rise in social tension between 1886 and 1889. Frequent demonstration led to police intervention and public unrest, such as Bloody Sunday, which happened in 1887. Anti-Semitism, crime, nativism, racism, and social disturbance and severe deprivation influenced public perception that Whitechapel was a notorious den of immortality. Such perceptions were strengthened in 1888 when the series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. Now, the next section is called The Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, and it's more like a storytelling, okay? Which was taken into account, and credit to Lemino on YouTube for helping me get the transcript, okay? What
Yeah, talk,
happened?
talk. Calling me to
Cool,
eat.
cool.
So I'm
Oh,
gonna
okay. Uh,
go on. We'll take a break,
w-
then we'll come back.
I mean, it's not long. I mean, now I mean, we've done more than halfway. I mean,
Okay,
we're
go on.
we're
It's alright.
halfway done. Okay.
Go on.
All right,
Don't
so
worry about it.
the story starts. It was the morning of August 7th, 1888, when an upstairs tenant named John Reeves headed out for work. Upon reaching the first floor landing, Reeves encountered the body of a woman lying on her back in a pool of blood. Horrified by the sight, he stumbled down to the street below in search for help. Constable Thomas Barrett was the first officer on the scene. He was soon joined by Dr. Timothy Colleen, who conducted a brief examination. The woman had been stabbed 39 times, primarily in the chest and abdomen. Dr. Colleen estimated that she had been dead for about 3 hours, thus placing the time of death at approximately 2:30 in the morning. The woman had likely been attacked where she was found, as no blood was found beyond the staircase landing. But this was strange, as none of the tenants in this crowded building had heard a single cry for help or a disturbance of any kind. One exception with Amy Hewitt, a tenant who claimed to have heard a lone cry of murder. But this was early in the evening of August 6th, and the scream had emanated from outside the complex. Hewitt further explained, "The district around here is rather rough, and cries of murder are of frequent and, if not nightly, occurrences." The victim was eventually identified as 39 years old Martha Tabram. Tabram was a mother of two and had separated from her husband many years prior. Her last known address was 19 George Street, a common lodging house less than 300 meters from the site of her death. Tabram had made a living through prostitution, and one of her associates was Mary Ann Connolly. Connolly testified that on the evening of August 6th, she and Tabram had been out drinking with two soldiers. Then, shortly before midnight, the party of four had separated. Let me remove this. Connolly took her client into Angel Alley, while Tabram guided hers into a neighboring George Yard. It was the last time Tabram. It was the last time Connolly saw Tabram alive. Barely 2 hours later, Constable Barrett had spoken to a soldier loitering near the north entrance of George Yard. Boggle, what the hell does loitering mean?
I think it's a place.
Loitering.
Oh,
Loi-
loitering. I heard of
yeah.
it. Loitering around the place. It means like I would say stalking around the place,
Okay.
like going around the place. You know,
So doing nothing. So just not walking around doing nothing.
walking around, check out the place where he shouldn't be.
Okay, where there is no. Okay, it says here loiter is to hang around a place with no real purpose.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Near the north entrance of Georgia, the soldier had told Barrett that he was waiting for his mate who had gone away with a girl. Half an hour later, Tabram is presumed to have died. Both Connolly and Barrett were called upon to identify the soldiers, but all those accused could provide an alibi. One had been at home with his wife, another at an army base, and yet another in a completely different part of the city. This was enough for Inspector Edmund Reed, the lead investigator on the case, to abandon the line of inquiry. Connolly and Barrett, having both picked out the wrong men, they could not be trusted again, as their evidence would be worthless. Even if a soldier had been responsible, no one could deduce a motive. The people of Whitechapel might have been accustomed to crime and violence, but the sheer brutality of this attack was as frightening as it was confounding. The crime is one of the most brutal that have occurred in some years. For a poor defenseless woman to be outraged and stabbed in such a manner is almost beyond belief. This was said by Edmund Reed. Okay, these were concluding remarks delivered at the final inquest held on August 23rd. Only a week later, things could go bad. Next, on the morn, yes, I heard.
All right,
Okay,
continue.
yes. Next one. On the morning of August 31st, a man named Robert Paul left his home on Foster Street and headed for work. After making a right turn into Bucks Row, he spotted a man standing on the road. The man turned around to face him and said, "Come and look over here. There is a woman lying on the pavement." The stranger was named Charles Cross, and he too had been on his way to work. When he first caught sight of the woman, the two men now cautiously approached. The woman's hands were cold to touch, and Cross believed she was dead. Paul, however, thought he could sense faint breathing. But instead of seeking immediate help, Cross and Paul were more concerned about being late for work, so they fucked off. As such, they quickly resumed their morning commute, hoping to notify a policeman along the way. Fortunately, Constable John Neal was just around the corner. Neal was equipped with a lantern and found the woman lying on her back with deep cuts across the throat. The wound was still bleeding, and the part of her body was still warm. He was soon joined by Constable John Thane, who was sent at once to fetch a nearby doctor. Upon his arrival, after 4 o'clock, Dr. Reese Levelvin, who is Welsh, because based on the name, is actually very Welsh, estimated that she had not been dead for more than half an hour. In order, Cross and Paul had more likely found the woman mere minutes after she was killed. Furthermore, three officers had patrolled the vicinity just a few minutes prior. Constable Neal had last suspected Box Row at approximately 3:15 a.m. So too had Sergeant Henry Kirby, whereas Constable Thane had merely passed the end of the street, none of whom had seen nor heard anything amiss. Upon the body's removal to the mortuary, a shocking discovery was made. Apart from two incisions in the throat, the woman had also been disemboweled.
God damn.
No organs had been removed, but Dr. Levelvin found several incisions running across the abdomen. He also believed that the killer possessed some rough anatomical knowledge, for he seemed to have attacked all the vital parts. The victim was quickly identified. Her name was Marianne Nichols, and she had turned 43 just 5 days before the murder. Nichols had at least six children, and her last known address was a common lodging at 56 Flower and Dean Street, which is now a different name today. Which I think it's what's it called? Flower and Dean Street. I think now it's called. It's in Spitalfields, which is like where was it again? Yeah, I think I can't remember the name. I don't know what the name is now. That's what it was called. On the night of her death, Nichols had been turned away from a lodging house on Thrall Street as she lacked funds to pay for a bed. Seeking to raise the money through prostitution, Nichols had then ventured down Osborne Street before meeting her friend Ellen Holland. The two of them shared a brief exchange, but Nichols was visibly drunk. When they parted ways around 2:30 in the morning, remember, not never in the afternoon, it's always at nighttime. Holland saw Nichols staggering eastwards along Whitechapel Road. Barely an hour later, she was found dead. Apart from the body itself, the killer had left nothing in their wake. No blood trails, no murder weapons, no witnesses. Inspector Joseph Helson, the lead investigator on the case, stated that not an atom of evidence can be obtained to connect any person with the crime. You know who we need in order to find Jack the Ripper during that time? You needed
Sherlock
Jackal.
Holmes.
Oh, fuck Sherlock. Not Sherlock Holmes. Even he could not solve it. Jackal. Jackal.
Okay,
He's got the.
okay.
Trust me. Take Jackal. Take him in 1888. Put him in the Flower and Dean Street and let him use his Inox, and you found Jack the Ripper. Anyway, while Nichols' case ground to a screeching halt, its similarities with the Martha Tabram case had not gone unnoticed. In both cases, the attack had been needlessly ferocious, and there was no discernible motive. Both victims were prostitutes of roughly the same age and moved in the same circles.
Mm.
The only meaningful difference was their injuries. Tabram had been repeatedly stabbed, whereas Nichols had suffered multiple slash wounds. Differences aside, the prevailing assumption was that the same deranged individual had committed both murders, a conviction that only grew stronger in the days that followed. Okay, so the next one is called. The next one is as the sun was rising on the September 8th, 1888, a man named John Richardson was on his way to work. At 4:45, he made a quick stop at 29 Hanbury Street. He went through the entrance and out the back door by way of a cramped hallway. Richardson then sat down on the backyard step before grabbing a knife to trim a vexing piece of leather from his boot. Once satisfied, he left the building and shut the front door behind him. About an hour later, a third floor tenant of the same address, John Davis, plodded downstairs into the hallway. The front door was wide open, but the one in the back was closed. When Davis went to open it, he found the bloody remains of a woman lying on her back just below the steps. Inspector Joseph Chandler was the first officer on the scene. After a brief inspection, he sent at once for a medic. Dr. George Phillips arrived at 6:30 and found the woman terribly mutilated. The throat had been dissevered deeply, whereas the abdomen had been entirely laid open. The intestines had been lifted out of the body and
God dang.
placed by the shoulder of the corpse.
Like
The
a
body,
necklace.
exactly. Well, it was a shoulder. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, fuck it. The body was then covered. Was then conveyed to the mortuary while Inspector Chandler and Dr. Phillips conducted a sweep of the backyard. Most of what they found belonged to the tenants of the building. But just below the resting place of the woman's feet, they found a small piece of cloth and two combs. The items had likely belonged to the victim, but it seemed Dr. Phillips that they had been deliberately positioned and arranged by the killer. The post mortem revealed that two brass rings had been forcefully removed from the victim's left hand. These rings were nowhere to be found. Portions of the victim's abdomen had also gone missing, including the womb. So he ripped out a woman's vagina. Dr. Phillips believed that the mold in which these portions were extracted showed some anatomical knowledge. This point was greatly expanded upon a subsequent inquest. The injuries had been made by someone who had considerable anatomical knowledge, skill, and knowledge. There were no meaningless cuts. For instance, no mere slaughter of animals could have carried out these operations. It must have been someone accustomed to the post mortem room. The victim was quickly identified as Annie Chapman. Chapman's date of birth is a bit uncertain, but she was roughly 47 at the time of her death. She had at least 7 children, but was tragically only survived by 2.
God
Hello?
dang, 7 children.
Yeah, I know.
Fucking hell.
I know.
Too much sexing.
I mean, how do you come? I mean, that was how they had to cover the boredom, you know. Like if literally how they covered boredom. Like, oh, I'm bored, let's fuck. That's literally what it
Fucking
was
hell,
back then.
that's nice, nice.
I know. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 35 Dorset Street. On the night of her death, Chapman had been denied accommodation as she lacked the funds for a bed. She was escorted to the premises by the night watchman, who then saw her vanish into a nearby alleyway. What happened to Chapman over the next few hours, nobody knows. Her whereabouts during this time is a complete mystery. But unlike the 2 previous cases, a witness in the Chapman case might have been caught a glimpse of the killer. At 5:30 on the morning of September 8th, a name. Okay. So the next one is what do you call it? The double event. Okay. A woman by the name of Elizabeth Long spotted a man and a woman conversing outside of 29 Hanbury Street. Long was positive that the woman she'd seen was Annie Chapman. Oh no, we're still in the same thing. Okay, it's not the double event.
Okay.
Okay, because it's still Annie Chapman, not the next bitch. But the man had
How
stood
many how
with.
many bitches have you done?
This is the second bitch.
5 bitches in it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's funny how we
Ah,
say it's funny how we say bitches, but it's true though. They are hoes. They were hoes.
okay.
All right. So Long said so, but the man had stood with his back towards Long, so she never saw his face. Long did, however, manage to overhear a fragment of their conversation. The man
Yo,
had posed.
do you want to take a break? I want to go eat.
How long will it take you to eat?
10, 15 minutes.
That's all right. Go.
Yeah. Break here.
Yes. Break time.
I'm back.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, let's start. I'm gonna turn on my camera. Let me just take my seat first.
So, third, Dr. Phyllis, are you eating ice cream?
Yeah.
It's raining outside. It's cold. And you're like, fuck it. Let me have a calypso.
It's not calypso. It's just one of those fruit outside layered, and there's like a fruit flavor cream inside.
Oh yeah,
The
I
solids.
don't
I
know
don't
the
know what it's
company.
called. Solario.
Solero.
Solero. This one.
Oh yeah, I know. Soleto. It's yeah, no, no.
Mm.
Dr. Phillips believed that the mold in which these portions were extracted showed some anatomical knowledge. The point was greatly expanded upon a subsequent inquest. The injury had been made by someone who had been yes, the man had posed the question, "Will you?" To which the woman responded, "Yes." At last thing point of the contention in the Chapman case is the time of death. According to Dr. Phillips, when he arrived at 6:30 a.m., Chapman had been dead for at least 2 hours. That would place her death at around 4:30. But according to Long, she saw Chapman alive a full hour later. Then there was a testimony of John Richardson. Richardson was the son of the one of the tenants in the building. At 4:45, he made a routine checkup on the door to the basement, which had previously suffered a break-in. When he found it secure, he sat down on the backyard steps to trim a piece of leather from his boot. Even though he sat mere centimeters from the murder site, Richardson did not see a body. He was adamant on this point. I could not have failed to notice the deceased if she had been there. To muddle the timeline even further, there's the testimony of Albert Kadoch. About 20 minutes past 5, Kadoch had gone through the backyard of 27 Hanbury Street when he heard voices coming from nearby. They were barely audible, however, and Kadoch had only made out the word no. A few minutes later, he had something falling against the wooden fence dividing the 2 yards. There's no way to untangle this web of contradiction. But Dr. Phillips did concede the possibility that he'd miscalculated, that the coldness of the morning and the great loss of blood had skewed his opinions, which was largely based on the warmth of the body. So presumably Dr. Phillips did miscalculate. The recollection of Lone and Kadoch were off by a few minutes. That would place Chapman's death at around 5:30 in the morning. By this point, the dim light of dawn would have provided the tenants an obstructed view of the murder site, some of whom had even slept with their windows open. In spite of this, the killer managed to evade detection and even made time to arrange the victim's possessions. As the tally of victims gradually mounted, the public grew increasingly anxious. They were not only frightened by the murders, but frustrated with the police that they perceived incompetence. Even across the pond were efforts of the police fiercely criticized. The London police detective force is probably the stupidest thing in the world. What the fuck?
What happened? You stuttering?
No, I swear my brother was doing something. It's like he just
Oh.
fell down. Okay, anyways, I was saying what these mocking quotes and illustration failed to capture were the overwhelmingly odds stacked in favor of the perpetrator. The police were up against someone who seemingly struck without motive, someone who left no murder weapon and few witnesses. On top of that, the East End was sincerely overcrowded while the police were understaffed. As one newspaper put it out there, a man in the East End of London is a grain of sand, as invisible and almost as beyond identification amid the masses. At no point this would become more apparent during the events of September 30th, the double event. This was the night where Jack the Ripper killed two bitches. Uh,
Bitches.
yes. All right. When the meeting came to a close around midnight, all but a few members returned home. Those who remained proceeded to drink and socialize. Half an hour into September 30th, Joseph Joseph LeVay stepped outside to get some fresh air. LeVay used the side entrance leading to Dotfield's yard and lingered about for about 10 minutes. Moments after LeVay had gone back inside, Maurice Eagle accessed the building by the same entrance. He too was a member of the club and had just returned after escorting a woman home. Neither of them noticed anything unusual. 20 minutes later, the sound of a horse and carriage could be heard trotting down Berner Street. The driver was Louis Diemschutz, the steward of the clubhouse. When Diemschutz drove into Dotfield's yard, his pony abruptly veered to the left. When he looked to the right, he thought he could discern something in the darkness. Diemschutz stepped down from his barrow and after lighting a match, he could see a woman lying on the side of the wall. without even knowing if she was drunk or dead. Deemschutz run, rushed into the club to check on his wife. When he found her safe and sound, he alerted the other members, and a small crowd gathered outside. They could see that the woman's throat had been fearfully cut, and a stream of blood was trickling down the yard. Eagle, Deemschutz, and a few others promptly dispersed to find a policeman, whilst a growing crowd of bystanders waited for authorities to arrive. There was no sign of the perpetrator, but across the city, less than a kilometer to the west, an even more ghoulish discovery was about to be made. At 1:30 of the same morning, Constable Edward Watkins patrolled an open space known as Mitre Square. Watkins beat would make him through the square about once every 13 minutes, and on this occasion it was deserted. But in time it took Watkins to complete another rotation, Mitre Square was turned into a crime scene. This is what Constable Edward Watkins said. I next came in at 1:44 a.m. I turned to the right. I saw the body of a woman lying down her back. I saw her throat was cut, and her bowels protruding. The stomach was ripped up. She was lying in a pool of blood. Dr. George Sequeira and Dr. Frederick Brown soon converged upon the scene. They found the terrible injuries inflicted upon the woman's face, throat, and abdomen. The intestines had been drawn out to a large extent and placed over the right shoulder. Among the many lacerations to the face, Dr. Brown noted that the lobe and auricle of the right ear was cut obliquely through. Based
God
on
dang.
their uh based on their expert opinion, coupled with the testimonies of Watkins, the woman had died within minutes of her bodies being found. Back in Berners Street, Dr. Frederick Blackwell and Dr. George Phillips had reached the same conclusion. The woman in Dutfield's yard had died within minutes of her body being found. But unlike previous victims, she had only suffered injuries to the throat. There were no abdominal mutilations or anything else by which to connect the attack to the others. But the murder in Dutfield's yard and the one in Mitre Square were separated by less than a kilometer away and some 45 minutes. This allowed for a chilling possibility. It was suspected then, as it continues to be okay, that when Deemschutz came clattering through the gateway, he unwittingly interrupted the murder. The killer may have been trapped inside Dutfield's yard because the gate on Berners Street was the only point of entry. Perhaps they saw an opportunity to escape when Deemschutz then rushed inside the club. From there, it would have taken him less than 15 minutes to reach Mitre Square, plenty of time to hunt for another victim. But it was emphasized that this is pure speculation. There is no evidence to suggest that the two murders were connected. The woman in Dutfield Yard was identified as 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride. Stride was a Swedish immigrant who lived in London for over 2 decades. Following her death of her husband, she had made a living through prostitution. Her last known
God
address
damn.
was a common lodging at 32 Flower and Dean
Literally, if you're a
Street.
woman in that era, two choices:
Mhm.
either get married to a rich person or be a prostitute.
Exactly.
God damn, that is pretty
Oppressive.
misogynistic. Oh, oppressive in that time and era. I mean, what can you do?
Exactly.
Imagine you said a Karen or someone who's like privileged woman in that time. God, my God,
They
we'll see how they
existed.
react.
They existed.
Shit, ready?
Yeah, they existed, and they did not give a fuck. Yeah. So on the night of her death, Stride had been seen quite an abundance of witnesses. She was seen in the company of a respectively dressed man around 11 o'clock p.m. At about quarter to midnight, Stride was seen walking to a man who was decently dressed and had the appearance of a clerk. Then, only a few minutes before the murder, Stride was seen in the company of a man by Constable William Smith. The man, Constable William Smith. What is his wife Jada Smith?
Yeah,
The man was carrying a small parcel in a newspaper and was of respectable appearance. It's unclear whether these descriptions are of the same person, or if Stride accosted multiple clients as the night progressed. There were other witnesses, some less credible than others, but the one that really stood out from the rest was Israel Schwartz. As about a quarter to one, Schwartz had been walking down Berners Street. As he came up on Dutfield's yard, he witnessed a man throwing a woman to the ground in front of the entrance. The woman had screamed 3 times, but not very loudly. Schwartz would later identify this woman as Elizabeth Stride. Schwartz did not try to intervene, but opted instead to simply cross the street. That's when he spied a second man on the opposite side of the of who when he spied a second man on the opposite side who was lighting a pipe. The man who attacked the woman appeared to address the second man by shouting the name Lipsky. The pipe smoker then proceeded to follow Schwartz before eventually breaking away. When taken at face value, the story appears to suggest that the killer had an accomplice by the name of Lipsky. This was indeed the interpretation of the government officials, but Inspector Frederick Aberline, one of the lead investigators on the case, which you can find on Assassin's Creed Syndicate, had a very different interpretation. You see, the name Lipsky had gained notoriety in 1887 when a Jewish man by the name of Israel Lipsky was convicted of murder. Owing to the public of that case, the name Lipsky had become an anti-Semitic slur. Aberline therefore deduced that the man who shouted Lipsky was directing an insult at Schwartz, who was described as having a strong Jewish appearance. The man with the pipe, meanwhile, may have been an innocent passerby who was frightened along with Schwartz. Whether Aberline's interpretation is correct is doubtful we'll ever truly know. Okay, nevertheless, Schwartz's account is compelling, as he's conceivably witnessed the moment when Elizabeth Stride was attacked. Back in Mitre Square, a large crowd of spectators had descended upon the scene, all driven by their morbid curiosity to get a glimpse of the body. The post-mortem revealed that the killer had extracted a few organs, including the womb and left kidney. According to Dr. Brown, this extraction required a great deal of knowledge, which he likened to that of a butcher. By contrast, Dr. Sequeira did not find any sign of great anatomical skill. The woman in Mitre Square was identified as 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes. Eddowes had at least 5 children, but after escaping her abusive husband, she had become estranged from her family. So let me get this straight. So from the last bitches that we just talked about, all of them weirdly had an abusive husband. Yeah, her last known address was a common lodging house at 55 Flower and Dean Street. Okay, literally, we had 32 Flower, we had 32. Then I don't know what the other number is. Now it's 55. On the night of her death, Eddowes had been out drinking. She got so drunk at around 8:30 in the evening. She was found lying on the sidewalk in Aldgate High Street, surrounded by a crowd. Good thing she did not ask her for a gangbang right there.
Fuck
The
yeah.
commotion attracted a few officers who then escorted Eddowes to a nearby police station. She remained locked in a cell until 1 o'clock in the morning. After being released from jail, Eddowes was likely spotted in the company of a man in the vicinity of Mitre Square. Only one of the witnesses, Joseph Lavende, had paid close attention to the couple. The man had the appearance of a sailor and wore a reddish handkerchief on his neck. While Lavende did identify the woman as Catherine Eddowes, he never saw her face. Nevertheless, this sighting was only made some 10 minutes before Eddowes' body was discovered by Constable Watkins. What's so incredibly tragic about the Eddowes case is how narrowly the killer escaped justice. First of all, the only private residence in Mitre Square was occupied by a policeman and his family. They had slept right next to an upper floor window overlooking the murder site. Second of all, a night watchman and a retired policeman had been cleaning a warehouse within earshot of the murder site. He would routinely hear the footsteps of patrolling officers, yet heard nothing at the time of the murder. Finally, Constable James Harvey had glanced into Mitre Square at roughly 2 minutes to 2. That's right in between the sighting by Lavende and the body's discovery. Harvey should have had an obstructed view of the murder site, yet he failed to notice anything suspicious. Was it too dark? Was the killer standing just a meters away, cloaked in shadow? Did one or more witnesses get the time wrong? While the killer did ultimately escape, they did not doing so without leaving a trace. Shortly before 3 o'clock, a blood-stained piece of cloth was found near the entrance to a building a few blocks to the northeast. It was proved to be a ripped portion of the apron worn by Edos. The patch was evidently torn off and disregarded by the killer upon their escape. Now, on the wall above this patch of apron, someone had written a message. The Jews are the men that would not be blamed for nothing. To this day, both the meaning and the author of this message remain in doubt. Was it written by the killer? Was it an attempt to cast suspicion upon, or even from the Jewish community? Was it completely unrelated to the murder? Similar questions should be raised by a few letters. Letters that was supposedly been written and posted by the killer 3 days before the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. The Central News Agency received a letter in the post, the author of which claimed responsibility for the recent murders and to be planning for the next job. Then, in the aftermath of the two killing, the same agency received a blood-smeared postcard. It contained details about the atrocities, which the author described as the double event. On the off chance that the letters were genuine, the police decided to make them public. The hope was that someone would recognize the handwriting. Unfortunately, no one did. Instead, it merely it served to advertise the name to which the letter had been signed. Opinions on the letter authenticity were divided back then and continue to be today. Most notably, the Dear Boss letter had promised to clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police. The police never received such a package, and neither two of the victims had their ears removed. You may recall that the right earlobe of Eddowes had been cut obliquely through. Was this a botched attempt by the killer to keep their promise, or was that merely one of numerous lacerations with no connection to the letter? The contents of the letter is notwithstanding. Modern linguistic analysis does suggest that they were penned by the same hand, so hocus or not, the authors were likely one of the same. However, the handwriting bore no resemblance at all to the message written above the torn patch of apron. Now, the publication of the letter inspired an onslaught of copycats. Agencies all over London were soon inundated with correspondence imitating the other two, but at least one of them might have been genuine. Not because of the contents of the letter, but rather the contents of a box with which it was delivered. Okay, on October the 16th, a man named George Lusk received a small package in the post. Lusk was the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a small group of local tradesmen who sought to identify the killer. The package consisted of a letter and a cardboard box containing half a kidney. The doctor examined the kidney and agreed it was human. Whether it was the same left kidney removed from the body, it could not be determined. It could, for instance, be an elaborate hoax by a medical student or someone with access to human organs. The author of the accompanying letter insisted that the kidney belonged to the victim, and they had fried and eaten the other half. A popular theory at the time, and one that is still today, that it was that some of the letters had been fabricated by the press. According to Chief Inspector John Littlechild, the letters were a smart piece of journalistic work. Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson dismissed the letter as the creation of an enterprising London journalist. Meanwhile, Chief Constable Melvin McNayton, he could discern the stained forefinger of the journalist. There are a few candidates for which this journalist might have been, but there is no solid evidence against any of them. Whether it was a hoax or by an enterprising journalist or genuine prose of the Ripper, the letters did nonetheless receive widespread attention. Okay, they commanded space in virtually every newspaper and dominated much of the public discourse throughout October. A month which passed without a single atrocity bearing the signature mark of the Jack the Ripper perhaps was finally over. It is pretty certain that the monster had become frightened and has suspended his horrible work for the present, if not good. Now the next one is known as the work from hell. Bago?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's too much information to take. So I was like, okay, okay, I get what's going.
It's
So that's
history.
the
It's his.
fourth victim or the fifth victim, Jay?
This is the last victim we're going to talk about. The work
Okay,
from hell. Okay.
okay.
On the morning of November 9th, a merchant and property owner named John McCarthy was going through his bookkeeping. McCarthy was the landlord of Miller's Court, and the tenants of room 13 had fallen behind on their rent. McCarthy sent at once for his assistant Thomas Boyer uh, to collect the money at quarter to 7 in the evening. After knocking twice without response, Boyer went around the corner to peer through the window, but his view was obstructed by a coat or a curtain. So Boyer had reached through a broken window pane to pull it aside. That's when he saw the severely mutilated body of a woman lying upon a bed in the corner of the room. Miller's Court was soon crawling with police, but the door to room 13 was locked and had to be forced open with a pickaxe. What they found inside was truly the stuff of nightmares. The sight we saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. Remember this. It looked more like the work of a devil than of a man. The whole scene is more than I can describe. I hope I may never see such a sight again. Dr. George Phillips described the body as cut all to piece. Dr. Thomas Bond described the woman's face as hacked beyond recognition. The abdomen had been emptied of its viscera, which the throat had been severed all round the body, all round down to the bone. The body had been monstrously disfigured with loose organs dispersed all around it. The room itself was sparsely furnished and offered little in the way of clues. Two tables, one or two chairs, and a small cabinet. Among the ashes of a fireplace, the police found patches of burnt clothing. Had the killer tried to dispose of evidence and had it merely been used for warmth and light? The victim was identified almost immediately. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly, and she was the tenant of 13 Miller's Court. But nearly everything about Kelly's life is shrouded in mystery. She was presumably Welsh or Irish descent in her mid 20s, making her the youngest victim by far. But given that no matching records of a Mary Jane Kelly had been found, it's probable that she was using a fake ID. In any case, Kelly had not been living alone. Up to a few days before the murder, she had cohabited with a man named Joseph Barnett. They only separated on October 30th because Barnett disapproved of Kelly's prostitution and the people with whom she associated. On the evening of November 8th, Barnett paid Kelly a visit. Upon his arrival, he found Kelly in the company of a woman who was just about to leave. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, there are conflicting accounts of whom this woman was. When Barnett arrived and how long he stayed, if we chose to believe Barnett, he arrived at some point between 7 and quarter to 8 and left before 9 o'clock. It's a bit odd on like how they know what time they left because at that time the only watch they could have was the pocket watch. But I don't know, man. Shortly before midnight, Kelly was spotted in the company of a man by her neighbor Marianne Cox. When Cox passed the couple, they were about to enter Kelly's room. Cox bid Kelly goodnight, but she was very much intoxicated and barely able to respond. Once they had gone inside, Cox could hear Kelly singing. When Cox then left the court about an hour later, Kelly could still be heard singing. By 2 o'clock, Kelly had apparently ventured back outside, for she was spotted by a man named George Hutchinson. The two of them were supposedly well acquainted, and Kelly had asked if he could spare a few coins. But Hutchinson was broke, and Kelly was desperate for money, so they soon parted ways. Moments later, Hutchinson observed Kelly being accosted by a well-dressed man. The two of them had seemingly jovial interaction and began walking north. Hutchinson found it suspicious that such a well-dressed man would seek the company of a woman like Kelly. As such, when the couple passed him by he scrutinized the man's appearance. He was, for instance, carrying a pair of gloves in his right hand and a small parcel in his left. Hutchinson decided to shadow the couple as they proceeded to Middle's Court. Before they vanished up the court, the man handed Kelly a red handkerchief, and she supposedly told him, "All right, my dear, come along. You will be comfortable." Basically, she was basically in basically in today's time, you'll be like, all right, you'll be like, all right, come along, let's fuck. That's literally in modern.
Fuck yeah.
That's how you translate it. That's how it's
That's how you pick up
translated.
chicks in that time. Like, come, let's fuck.
No,
Like,
no,
okay,
no, no, no. This is something that she said. She said this.
okay,
Okay. She
okay.
said. She said, "All right, my dear, come along and you'll be comfortable." And translating in modern times, it's literally, "Come to my bed, let's fuck." But neither Kelly nor the man have reappeared. At roughly the same time, Cox returned home. In stark contrast to the loud singing upon the last departure, Cox was now struck by a complete absence of sound and light from Kelly's room. Finally, at approximately 4 o'clock, a tenant up above and a woman across from Kelly's room heard the cries of murder. The voice of that woman appeared to emanate from nearby. Meanwhile, other denizens, I don't know, of the court heard no screams at all. According to Dr. Bond, Kelly died between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Phillips placed the time of death a few hours later. But some witnesses were quite adamant that they had seen or even spoken to Kelly. As late as 10 o'clock in the morning, keep that in mind that her body was discovered at quarter to 7 in the morning. These contradictions are difficult to reconcile, and the precise time of death eludes us to this day. Mary Jane Kelly is typically regarded as the Ripper's final victim, along with Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes. She is part of the canonical five. The five victims most likely have been slain by the same hand. Even the canonical five are not without controversy, so the total number of victims is a matter of debate. Presumably that Kelly was indeed the final victim. One has to wonder why. Why did the murders come to such an end? Did the Ripper give in to fears of being caught? Were they imprisoned for a different crime? Perhaps they succumbed to an illness or committed suicide. Could they have migrated to another countries? Perhaps they deliberately changed their modus operandi to confuse the police. The possibilities are virtually endless, which means there is no shortage of suspects. However, there is one person in particular who has been identified in
Okay,
reality.
who is he?
Okay? All right. So, there were about 5 suspects, but I'm going to talk about the main suspect, okay? This one is a Polish barber.
Baba.
Barber. Yes.
Okay.
His name is Aaron Kosminski. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm saying it is because
Give me a sec.
because
Yep. Let's go on.
all right, okay. As I was saying, yes. So what was I saying? Yes, as I was saying, yes. So it's Aaron Kosminski. The reason why they did that, you know how Catherine Eddowes had her apron ripped off, right, and was bloodstain on it. You know how
Sorry, it was lagging. Yeah. Now it's
huh.
okay. Yeah. You saying?
So you know how Catherine Eddowes died because, and then what is it? A part of her apron was found elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, they took that and they did some DNA tests. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
of course, it was until 2019 where they did the DNA test on the Kosminski family line, and basically they compared the DNA on the apron to the current living Kosminski, and
Mm-hmm.
they had a very big match to it. So they concluded that Jack the Ripper, that the Jack the Ripper's identity was Aaron Kosminski, who was a Polish barber who weirdly would live inside an asylum, presumably the asylum of Lambeth Hospital. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes what can be said about the Industrial Revolution, but it was mainly as how I'm mainly about Jacques the Ripper. All right. Anyway, let's end it right here. I want to say to you guys, thank you so
Yep.
much for watching. I want to say to you guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to keep subscribing to this channel. Follow our social media, link down in the description. Follow my main channel, and yeah, that's it. Thank you
History
and
lesson
peace.
concluded.
Yes, your history lesson has been concluded. Now,
Okay.
let's enjoy this Mr. Light jump scare. Thank you.
What?
Bye.